Hello everyone and welcome back to the Growing Together 2017 Winter Webcast Series. My name is Susan DeBleek and I'm the Assistant Coordinator for the Master Gardener program. This is the second part of the three-part webinar series. We're going to be talking about the impact that we can be measuring that Master Gardeners are making. So we're exploring how to measure volunteer project impacts and also build strong partnerships for effective community programs. We've got two parts today. We've got the Impact Matters part with Christine Roddick, and we're going to be talking about partnerships with Christine Haddikel. Two items that we have for you today. We do have a worksheet for you to follow along and take notes. And there we also have the link to the online evaluation form so we can hear from you about what next steps you're taking as a Master Gardener because of this presentation. If you are a Master Gardener, we want to encourage you to log your continuing education hours. So that will be 2 hours for today's presentation, and that counts towards the 10 required continuing education hours to stay an active Master Gardener. So please log your hours today. With that, I wanted to hand it over to Christine Roddick.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for participating today in this continuing education session on how impact matters in the programs that we do through Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. We're going to share some examples today that are specifically relevant to Master Gardeners and the Growing Together project that we have been working on as a collaboration between Human Sciences Extension and Outreach's SNAP Ed program and the Master Gardeners. So thanks for joining us today, and I hope that this presentation gives you a really clear picture into why evaluation matters and the kinds of things we can do when we have really strong evaluation data to work with. My name is Christine Roddick. I am the State Coordinator of SNAP Education. I work in Human Sciences Extension and Outreach on campus at Iowa State, and I have been partnering with the Master Gardener program for about 2 years to manage Growing Together. And I have had the privilege of getting to know several Master Gardeners through that project, and it has been really neat getting to get a glimpse into the way Master Gardener works, and to now be able to talk about how we can really show our impact together. So a little bit about our plan for the day. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview into SNAP education. Some of you may have heard me speak before in relation to our joint project, but if you haven't, I want to give you just a little bit of an overview of what SNAP Ed is all about. We'll also talk about the importance of evaluation, how we design programs so that they can be evaluated and that we don't get to the end and are unsure of how we show our impact. And then we'll also use a case study of showing evaluation in Growing Together and how our first year's evaluation data turned out, and kind of the significance of that impact. So to start with, a little bit of an overview of SNAP education. SNAP is an acronym. It stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It is the new name for food stamps. So if you're familiar with the food stamp program that provides benefits to families that have low income, that's what SNAP is. It's just SNAP's new name. And SNAP has an arm that focuses on helping families who participate in the SNAP program make the healthiest choices possible within their limited food budgets. It's a federal program. It's administered by USDA. The USDA provides funding, the programmatic guidance, and also a very basic evaluation framework for us to follow, so that they end up with the kinds of things they need to report the impact of SNAP Ed. The funding for SNAP Ed is determined by the Farm Bill, and it's directly tied to SNAP, the actual food benefits program, formerly known as food stamps. The funds for SNAP education must be spent directly on programming that benefits families with low income. The way I like to describe this is if we think about, a bucket full of water, and that's the SNAP budget. We've taken, a cup of that water out of the bucket and said we're going to use that for education instead of food benefits. So we need to make sure the folks benefiting from that education are the same audience, that same audience with low income that would likely participate in SNAP, because that's money that could have otherwise been spent on food benefits. And so we need to make sure that our ultimate beneficiaries are those low income families. And here at ISU, SNAP education is coordinated out of Human Sciences, Extension and Outreach out of my office. SNAP education is a national program. Every state has the opportunity to do SNAP education, and I put on this slide just a few of the logos from other states' SNAP Ed projects, just to give you a taste for the fact that, SNAP Ed is a national program. It looks a little different in every state. Sometimes it's even called different things, but it's all over. So you can see here we've got North Carolina, Maine, Hawaii, and Arkansas SNAP Ed. Now we're going to take a few minutes. I'd ask you to pause the presentation for about 5 minutes and answer this question just with those who are in your group. Why do you think evaluation is so critical to programs like SNAP Ed? Just think through why that would matter. And if you're not with a group while you're watching this, you can kind of just think to yourself. We'll take a few minutes to do that. Okay, I hope everyone had an interesting conversation about why evaluation in programs like SNAP Ed would be so important. I hope that we'll build on some of your ideas here as we move through the presentation. So evaluation is critically important in programs like SNAP Ed. Public funds are what pay for this type of work. They're difficult to get, and they're constantly under scrutiny. So we must really do a good job of proving our value. I used the image here of, cuts to SNAP because any of you who watch the news have probably seen that the SNAP budget is one that is often scrutinized and often a potential target for reductions, and SNAP Ed is part of that budget. And so it's really important that if we're going to use public funds and taxpayer dollars for this type of work, that we're able to show that we make really strong impacts with that investment. So that's why it's really important that our evaluation is strong. I've put on this slide here just a few of the folks that we report our evaluation results to. So local stakeholders, our state partners, partners of the university, partners of our programs at the state level, the federal office at USDA that oversees the SNAP education program, and then also Congress. I make visits each February to members of the Iowa delegation in the House and Senate and share with them the work that we've done in SNAP education so that they know the types of deliverables that they're getting in Iowa for the investment that USDA is making. There are different types of evaluation, and I want to stress from the beginning that all are necessary and all are valuable. Evaluation at its core is really diverse. There's a lot of different ways to look at the strengths of a program. You've got hard data, which is, the numbers. You've also got descriptive data, things that show partnerships and connections and, the depth and strength of those partnerships, things that are a little bit more qualitative and descriptive. Then you've got things like personal stories, successes of an individual family or a network or partnership can be told through a story, and those can be really powerful. If any of you have ever watched debate in Congress on C-SPAN or, other broadcast TV, you'll often see that when a bill is being debated, the members who are actively in the debate are often telling stories. That's often the nature of their commentary on something, is they try to make it personal. And when I go and visit offices in February in DC, I often get that question, can you give me a story? Because that's just a way to kind of immediately get to that personal level for people. The last piece or type of evaluation that we have here is geographic analysis. So looking at where we're serving folks, where they live, how far away they are from each other, our coverage of the state, those types of things, looking at our work geographically as well. So I put this quote on the screen because this is a quote that any SNAP-Ed administrator, myself included, kind of makes us cringe. So this is a no evidence of success finding by the Congressional Budget Office. The Congressional Budget Office is a nonpartisan office that serves Congress and basically looks at the programs that Congress funds and gives them a report on how is that program doing. And back quite a few years ago, there was a finding that SNAP education nationwide had no evidence of success. And that was a really problematic finding for SNAP education. And it was really tough for folks like me to take, because no evidence of success does not mean that the program is unsuccessful. It means that there's no evidence of that success that can be shared or understood by others. So even though those are two very different things, you can have a really successful program that you don't evaluate well and you don't capture your evidence of success, or you can have a program that really is unsuccessful, is problematic, not succeeding, not meeting goals. But ultimately, the Congressional Budget Office is going to call those two programs the same thing: no evidence of success. So the consequence can be the same. Your program having no evidence of success, it may as well be unsuccessful. So when we have a program like SNAP-Ed in Iowa that is successful, that really is making impacts with folks, we need to evaluate it strongly, and we need to capture that impact in a way that we can then share with other people. And that's what we're really going to dig into for the rest of our hour together. So out of that finding of no evidence of success came some more kind of structured evaluation practices within SNAP-Ed. And one of them is the SNAP-Ed toolkit. Now, I don't mention this so that any of you feel the need to, go and study this toolkit. But it was a response that USDA had to that finding. They were troubled by it too and said, we need to find a way to look at SNAP education in a way that allows us to tell the story of its success. So they developed a framework. They developed some indicators, which you can see on this slide, of the kinds of things that we influence in SNAP education, and developed some ways for us to measure those. And then USDA can take all of those state level evaluations and pool them together nationally to tell the story of SNAP-Ed's impact. So that finding several years ago of no evidence of success ultimately was a really good thing for SNAP-Ed, because it pushed us forward to develop a much more rigorous model and strategies for education and evaluation. Another effect of that no evidence of success finding is that the investment in evaluation by SNAP education has really increased. Up to 10% of a state's SNAP-Ed budget can be used for evaluation expenses. That just really demonstrates USDA's high expectations for us to be able to capture and show impact. It's not free to evaluate programs. We do have to spend money to do it. And so this permission of being able to spend up to 10% of our budget on evaluation is just a gesture from USDA to show their support for this work as well. We in Iowa don't spend really even close to this 10% of our budget on evaluation in a standard year. But there are certain years when we'll do a special project, like one that we're doing right now on return on investment, where we'll have to invest a fair bit of money for a year or two, and it might average out to 10% in a special year like that. So a little bit about our reporting in SNAP Education. We report against those indicators that I just showed you on the screen from that framework. It happens annually. We report our reach, so how many Iowans did we serve, how many Iowans benefited from the work that we were doing, what was our impact with those Iowans, how much did it cost. We separate our costs out based on direct service costs, which is the vast majority of our budget, and then what percentage of our budget was on administrative costs, because obviously we want to keep those as low as we can. And then the value, ultimately what was our return on investment. And our report is a combination of data that we're able to collect and create here on campus, and then also data that comes in from the field. And we'll do a case study a little later on that shows how that combination comes together. I'm now going to move into a little bit about how we design a program in a way that allows us to evaluate it. Successful reporting, being able to get to that point where we're ready to really share with our partners and with our funders our impact, often requires us to work backwards. I call it backward design. It's a common term that's used in education. The idea of starting with where you want to be in the end. So what is it that you want to be able to demonstrate in the end? And then working backwards from that to develop a program that will get you there. So you know from the get-go what you want to measure and what you want your findings to be, and you develop the program that will help you get to that point. That's backward design, starting with where you actually want to end up in the end. So then just returning back to this framework that was developed for SNAP Ed, you can see on here that there are dozens of indicators that can be measured in SNAP Ed. Everything from healthy eating to food resource management, food safety, family meals, healthy weight, all kinds of things. Now, there's no way that any one state or any one SNAP Ed project could measure all of these things. So we have to make choices about what we really think that we can do in our state, what we think is most relevant for the families we want to serve, and of course what fits within our budget to influence. So no one state is working on all of these frameworks or for all of these indicators within the framework, but instead each state is making choices. And I'm going to walk through a case study of ISU's SNAP Ed project to kind of show you how we've made some of those choices. So our goal in SNAP Education is to help families experiencing poverty make the healthiest choices possible within their limited budgets. So we know that most of the families we serve participate in the SNAP program, in food stamps. And so they're on very tight food budgets. Yet we want to encourage them and help them make the healthiest choices possible within those budgets. That's ultimately what we need to do and what we need to demonstrate when we're finished, that we've made a difference in that. So I'm going to move into another kind of pause and discuss piece here. I'd like you to take a few minutes in your group. If you have the goal of trying to help families experiencing poverty make the healthiest food choices possible within their limited budgets, what types of things would you do? So think about your community, think about any personal experience you might have with this topic, and think about what you would do to help families in poverty make the healthiest choices possible. So take a few minutes to discuss that and then come on back together. So I hope you've had some good conversations about how you might approach this in your communities based on, the needs that you've seen or, personal experience that you have. I'm going to share with you a little bit about how we do this in ISU SNAP-Ed. So we start with backward design. We start with our objectives, and we build a program that helps us meet them. The objectives must be specific. They must be valuable. They must be measurable. We don't want to set an objective like that is so vague that we wouldn't know when we had accomplished it. An objective, for example, like we want people to be healthier. There's a lot of ways to be healthy. There's a lot of influences on, what it means to be healthy. We need to be more specific than that. We need to know when we've succeeded, and we need to be able to have actual measurements that show us that. So here's a sampling of the objectives that we use in Iowa SNAP-Ed. We want to increase fruit consumption by 1/2 cup a day, vegetable consumption by 1/2 cup a day, and dairy product consumption by 1/2 cup a day, 1/2 cup per day. 92% of participants will report improvement in one or more food resource management practices. Food resource management is things like planning meals, comparing prices, not running out of food by the end of the month. Those are food resource management skills. And 92%, I realize, is a very specific number, but we set that number based on the fact that we've been doing this work for years at Iowa State, and we know that 92% is, it's a lofty goal. That's nearly every single one of our participants will demonstrate an improvement in food resource management practices. But we also know from experience that the vast majority of them do. So 92% is a high number, but that's what we set as our goal for ourselves. We also expect that 50% of our participants will report increase in physical activity. That our local healthy food access coalitions will develop across the state. We'll be able to count them. We'll be able to say that they're there. And that access to fruits and vegetables in food pantries will increase by 70,000 pounds. So again, that number 70,000 is kind of specific. You might wonder where it comes from. It comes from the fact that we now have a full year of the Growing Together program kind of under our belts, and we're able to see that 70,000 pounds is possible. With the partnership between SNAP Education and the Master Gardeners, we feel confident that 70,000 pounds is possible based on our experience. So you can see that these objectives are specific. They're things that we'll be able to measure when this project is done, and that we'll be able to share with our stakeholders, with USDA, with Congress. Did we make an improvement in fruit consumption, vegetable consumption, dairy consumption? Were our families less likely to run out of food at the end of the month? Were they planning their meals, comparing prices, using grocery lists? These are all things that we know that we can measure so that we'll be able to, in the end, show that we've made an impact with the families in our program. So how do we get there? How do we get to the point where we're able to demonstrate that impact? SNAP Education in Iowa is a combination of a few different types of programming that we try to kind of wrap around the family and provide not only skill building opportunities and educational opportunities, but also projects that make healthy choices easier for people. And I'm going to walk you through each of those things now. So Buy, Eat, Live Healthy is our direct education program. This is a program that families with low income can enroll in, and they will spend time with a peer educator, a nutrition educator, who will also work with them on cooking skills, shopping skills, basic nutrition and child feeding, very much a focused kind of direct education on these types of concepts. These are two of our nutrition educators in Buy, Eat, Live Healthy. That's Star on the left and Cassie on the right. They both work down in the Des Moines area. We do not have Buy, Eat, Live Healthy in every county. It's in the counties in the state that have the highest poverty rates. So that's where you're going to see Buy, Eat, Live Healthy educators active. These two happen to be recruiting at a WIC office. That's a place where we will often find families who are interested in and eligible for this type of program. So as I said, Bite Live Healthy is direct nutrition education. All of our families in Bite Live Healthy are low income, and they all have young children. And by young, we mean typically under the age of 10. It's an 8-lesson series, so it's a significant commitment for that family to go through the Bite Live Healthy lessons. And what we tell them up front, if they say, wow, 8 lessons, that sounds like kind of a lot. We say, if we just wanted to teach you one new recipe or give you a couple of health tips, we could do that, in an hour. We could just see you one time. But we expect to make a significant, help you make a significant change in your life. That you will change the way that you plan your meals, change the way that you think about how you feed your family, and help you feel confident that you can do all of these things regardless of your budget, and we can show you how. And so it takes us 8 lessons to get there. So we say if you're willing to give us, these 8 hours of your time to go through Bite Live Healthy, we can tell you that you can expect that you'll have, a great improvement in your confidence and skills to be able to do some of these really important things. We have program assistants across the state in 21 counties that provide Bite Live Healthy. You saw a couple of them on the previous slide. Here's another one. This is San Juana. She works in the Davenport area. In order to participate in Bite Live Healthy, as I said, we ask that you have a child under the age of 10 and that you are at or below 185% of the federal poverty level. And again, we're using SNAP Ed funds for this. So we have to be able to prove that those folks who are benefiting from the program are themselves low income. And the vast majority of our participants are SNAP. Many are single mothers. The educators who deliver Bite Live Healthy, here's 2 more of them. This is Julie and Paula. Nationally, these programs are taught by peer educators, some of whom are actually graduates of Bite Live Healthy themselves. We call them peer educators because the folks who we hire to deliver Bite Live Healthy are often from the neighborhoods who we want to serve. And they often have personal direct experience with poverty. That's really important to us because we want these educators to be relatable, likable. They need to be flexible. They need to be able to, for example, walk into someone's home who is quite low income and be able to function well in that environment and not express any kind of judgment. And so it's important that we find those folks who have that relatability and that flexibility, and many of whom have that experience in their past. So they're able to speak really personally about some of those challenges and help families kind of troubleshoot through the kinds of barriers that they encounter to making healthy choices. So we're lucky to have a really strong group of peer educators that deliver Bite Live Healthy across the state. And I hope as Master Gardeners that some of you have had the chance to interact with them in your county offices or, run into them at a food pantry or community garden. You may cross paths from time to time. So some of the behaviors we address, we talked about these already a little bit, but fruit, vegetable, and dairy intake, food budget management, child feeding, physical activity, food safety, and then also home cooking. It's really tough to eat healthy on a budget if you don't know how to cook. Because you end up feeling the need to buy, partially prepared and convenience foods, which tend to have a much higher price tag. So home cooking is really a focus of Bite Live Healthy. We cook at almost every lesson. The methods we use a lot of short-term goal setting, week-to-week types of goal setting. Each lesson includes physical activity and also hands-on work with food preparation, meal planning, shopping. As I mentioned, cooking is really critical when you're trying to eat healthy on a budget. And it's also one of the most favorite parts of our program, not only for the educators, but also for the families who we serve. As you can imagine, it takes a lot of training to become a Bite Live Healthy educator. This is a group of us at a training that we had last summer. And now a little bit of an overview of our evaluation results from 2015. So our last completed fiscal year. I just want to share with you some of those impacts we were able to measure. So 96% of our participants made improvements in at least one food group. So that means they came closer to the recommendation for consumption of that food group. 88% improved their food resource management. If you remember, our target for that was 92. So we were a little bit short of our target on food resource management. 70% improved their food safety practices. 49% improved their physical activity. And these are all impacts that we can see as a result of that direct education in Buy, Eat, Live Healthy. But with SNAP-Ed has come some changing expectations. It used to be the case that we did direct education only in SNAP-Ed, and that was the case all across the country. We do education very well in Extension, but education is just one piece of the picture, and it's often not enough to trigger really lasting change when you're dealing with a kind of wicked problem, a deep, tough problem. And so we have kind of turned a corner in SNAP-Ed to adding in some additional kinds of interventions, not just direct education. Because it's not just, choices that determine whether a person is able to eat healthy. It's not just their personal choices that they make, but there are some other factors that come into play. And one of the really big ones is food insecurity. We have a really serious problem in Iowa with food insecurity. Hunger affects about 1 in 8 Iowans. And in some counties, the number is as high as 1 in 5, almost 20% who are food insecure. And I'll give you a definition of food insecurity here in a minute. But it's really hard to think about the quality of the food you're eating when you're worried about having enough food to eat and enough food to feed your children. So it's a factor that comes into, discussions about healthy eating that we can't really ignore. So this data here on the screen translates to about 389,250 Iowans who are food insecure. And that includes 139,850 children. So the food insecurity data in Iowa really is compelling. We are a very prosperous state. There's a lot about Iowa that is very strong, very prosperous, great economy. But we can't forget about the fact that we do have an issue with food insecurity in our state. And that has a huge impact on the choices people are able to make. And here's a definition for you of what I mean when I say food insecure. It's the state of being without reliable access to a sufficient quantity of affordable, nutritious food procured through socially acceptable ways. And if you take a second to kind of think about what that means, if you're thinking about what is socially acceptable ways, well, we wouldn't want someone to be, getting some of their food by going through someone else's trash or the dumpster behind a restaurant. That is not a socially acceptable way. When you're truly food secure, you're able to get enough food for a healthy diet in ways where, you feel you're being treated humanely and with dignity. So that's what we mean when we say socially acceptable ways. And when we think about the folks we serve in Buy, Eat, Live Healthy, almost all of them are mothers. Many of them are single mothers. And so kind of the dark cloud of food insecurity is particularly pronounced when people are thinking about their children and concerns that they have about whether they're going to have enough food to be able to feed their children, let alone feed their children the healthy food that they want to feed them. So a little bit about chronic disease and poverty. People who experience poverty are more vulnerable to disease. They have an increased exposure to risk. and they often have decreased access to health services and preventive care. So we've all heard in the news about, the cost of chronic diseases in the United States. They're way less expensive to prevent than they are to treat. And poverty is a significant risk factor for chronic diseases. We can also think about it flipped the other direction. If poverty increases your risk for chronic disease, having a chronic disease can also increase your risk for poverty. For example, if you have a chronic disease, you may end up with a job loss, really high healthcare costs, or sometimes chronic diseases can lead to folks self-medicating, using prescriptions inappropriately, that sort of thing, which can also then snowball into a situation where they end up experiencing poverty. So these two are really intimately tied together, chronic disease and poverty. So that's why it's really important that we have programs like SNAP Education that address these issues in a preventive way, and try to help folks, get on a really healthy path that helps them either delay or prevent chronic diseases. Okay, so I'm going to transition now into looking at a model that guides a lot of the work that we do in ISU SNAP Ed. So this is called the Socioecological Model, and I know that that's a long, complicated science-sounding name, but really the concept behind it is really simple. So I'm hoping that I can kind of break this down and it'll make sense for everybody. The socioecological model is based around this idea that we as individuals, you can see us down there in the bottom of the model, that we have our own knowledge, attitude, and skills that shape the decisions we make. And that's certainly true. All of us can relate to that, we have our own kind of disposition that informs the way that we live. And then we have this interpersonal level, one step out, that is our family, our friends, our social networks, and they too influence the choices that we make. Those connections are important determinants of the way we live our lives. Then if you go out one more step, to the organizational level, that is the organizations we're a part of, the social institutions that we're a part of, things like schools and workplaces, those also have an impact on the choices that we make. They are a huge determinant of our environment, of where we spend our time and what is encouraged and allowed and supported in those environments. If you think about, something like breastfeeding, something that's really healthy for both mom and for baby, but it's much easier to do if mom's workplace allows her to express breast milk during breaks while she's at work, and makes that possible for her. So I think you can see how, the organizational kind of environment that you're in can determine whether you engage in a healthy behavior or not. Then if we go up to the community level, this is relationships among organizations, and the networks that develop in a community. Those can also shape what kind of health behaviors are kind of socially promoted and funded by a community, those that are really encouraged from agency to agency. That is another kind of factor there, that community level. And then if you go all the way to the outside, so that's the public policy. These are national, state, and local laws. And you may not think about laws having that much of an influence on the choices that we make in terms of our health, but they really do. Especially if you think about some of the kind of major public health initiatives of the last, few decades. Public health as a discipline tends to hang its hat on a few things as real public health victories in the last few decades. One is smoking. So if you think about cigarette smoking, for example, this is a huge public policy related health behavior. There have been significant drops in smoking in the last few decades, and there's a lot of reasons behind that. Some of it is education. People are more aware of the impact that smoking has on your health. But if we think about the other levels of this model, there are also other factors that have led to the decrease in smoking. So if we go all the way out to the public policy level, think about how hard it is now to smoke in public. It's become very difficult. People definitely have the expectation that if they're in a public place, a restaurant, a library, a concert venue, a theater, that they will not be surrounded by cigarette smoke. And it certainly didn't used to be that way. You also have, whole places like campus at ISU where smoking is not allowed. So those kinds of policies have really shaped it. You can also look at state policies, state laws related to taxes on cigarettes that have made them much more expensive to purchase. So all of those things kind of, pool together to decrease the rate of smoking in the United States. So even though every time a smoker or if a non-smoker is deciding to start smoking or a smoker is deciding to quit, ultimately that's an individual decision. There are a lot of things that play into them making that decision. The ease of smoking versus the complication, the expense of smoking. What are my family and friends going to say? Is it, socially acceptable? Has definitely become less and less so. All of those things come together. Does my workplace allow me to smoke anywhere on the premises on my break, or is that going to be really hard for me to do? All those things come together and influence that decision. So even though it comes down to an individual making a choice, there's a lot that goes into that choice. And successful interventions are those that work at more than one level, not just at the level of the individual and not just at the level out there of public policy and lawmaking, but that work at multiple levels within this model. Those are going to be the ones that are most likely to be successful. So that moves me into talking about growing together, which is the kind of additional piece that we add in to Buy, Eat, Live Healthy to make up our total SNAP-Ed program in Iowa. Buy, Eat, Live Healthy, our direct education program very much operates at this individual level. It's about knowledge, attitudes, and skills. And it's about, do I feel confident that I can do these things? Do I feel confident that I can cook at home, that I can, shop from a meal plan, and those types of things? Whereas growing together is much more of a community and organizational project. So I've broken that down here on this slide. This is kind of how I look at SNAP education in Iowa in terms of those levels in the socioecological model. So we have the individual and interpersonal. That's Buy, Eat, Live Healthy. That's our direct education and skill building around nutrition, shopping, and cooking. We work mostly with mothers, but we also work with mothers and their children. So that's where you get in some of those interpersonal pieces. We'll also occasionally work with an intergenerational family. So we might be working with a grandmother and a mother who kind of share responsibility for caring for the children in the home. So really individual and interpersonal, those are the levels where we operate in Buy, Eat, Live Healthy. Then if we pop out to growing together, which is our partnership with Master Gardeners, that's really organizational and community. That's at two other levels of the socioecological model. Because we're making fruits and vegetables more available for families with low income. We're getting them grown or rescued and getting them into food pantries. We're also connecting growers and pantries together so that they're able to kind of talk about how they might support each other and what each other needs to really reach their mutual goals. And ultimately, we're trying to make those healthy choices easier. When it comes down to that family making the decision about what they're going to choose to buy and choose to eat, we want the healthy choice to be as easy as it can be. Most of us as humans will choose the easier path, especially when we're in a period in our life or even a period in our day when we're feeling stressed or overwhelmed. So we want those healthy choices to be as easy as we can make them. Because if the healthy choice is significantly more difficult, most of us aren't going to make that choice. So now let's visit a little bit about evaluating Growing Together. We've only had one full year of implementation of this project, but we have some really nice evaluation data that we're able to share. And we're only able to do that because the Master Gardeners that partnered with us last year on this project did a great job of capturing their impact, and it's allowed us to tell this story. So it's made for a really nice example to be able to share with all of you now. So when we think about evaluating Growing Together, we had a few kind of, buckets of information that we wanted to look at. One was our training for Master Gardeners. So we did some webcasts last year that were training Master Gardeners to get ready to be part of Growing Together. And the subject matter for those was things like the realities of hunger in Iowa. We also talked about how to work with food pantries, kind of how to understand them, how to start that communication. And we also did a session on food safety in donation gardens and the importance of that. So we measured the impact of those webcasts. We got feedback from those who participated in them. We measured their, change in knowledge and intentions. So we'll talk about that piece of the evaluation. We also captured volunteer hours. So the hours committed to the project. That's a real important thing to measure because volunteer hours are just as good as paid staff hours. So when we look at that return on investment, that's really high quality work that was being done in Growing Together that was not being done by someone being paid a salary. So capturing those volunteer hours is really important. Partnerships. We asked our participating Master Gardeners to share their partnerships with us, so we were able to count those, and we'll report those out. Local coalitions, their development and their strength, and then finally our pounds of produce. This is really where the rubber meets the road. The fruits and vegetables that we were able to get into food pantries where families with low income could get them. One of the things we teach big time in Buy, Eat, Live Healthy is the importance of eating fruits and vegetables. Now, they don't have to be fresh. They can be canned or frozen as well. That's certainly fine. But eating plenty of fruits and vegetables a day is really key to a healthy diet. But being able to afford fruits and vegetables is a common barrier for families with low income. And there was a study done in 2014 that showed the number one thing that food pantry clients in Iowa wanted but couldn't get was fruits and vegetables. So the point for our intervention was really clear. We needed to get pounds of produce into pantries, and we're really excited to be able to report out our success on that now. So last year's impact, let's take a look at it in terms of the numbers. So we delivered 6 hours of training through those Master Gardener webcasts, and there were 328 Master Gardeners who participated in those 6 hours of training. We also had more than 90 volunteers engaged with the project, and they together devoted 860 hours of time to the project. We also had 7 research farms, ISU research farms, that hosted and helped to establish model donation gardens that could be used for building community awareness and some additional training. We had 47 sites that received food donations. So some of these sites were food pantries where families with low income go to get food. Some of them were meal sites, other places serving families in poverty. But 47 sites received food from the Growing Together project. $14,597 were leveraged beyond the mini grant funds. So we put out about $20,000 in mini grants last year to support donation gardening efforts with Master Gardeners across the state. And those Master Gardener groups were able to get an additional $14,597 to use toward their projects. So that's a really powerful indicator right there. For the investment that we put in, they were able to get additional funds as well. And we had 20 partners supporting local projects. So this is beyond the Master Gardeners and the Extension Office. This is 20 other partners in those communities that joined the team and supported those local projects. And finally, the last kind of piece of data that is so important is that we had over 67,000 pounds of fruits and vegetables that were either grown or rescued and donated through the Growing Together project. And this is a hugely meaningful number. Another way that I like to kind of describe this number to get our heads around, so what does 67,000 pounds of fruits and vegetables mean? There's roughly 3 servings of fruit or vegetable in a pound. It varies based on what the produce item is, but on average, it's about 3 servings to a pound. So this is over 200,000 servings of fruits and vegetables that were donated. So very, very important when we think about the improved access for families with low income. And I mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again. Our ability to report data like this, to be able to share things like, wow, 67,000 pounds, more than 200,000 servings, that's only because the master gardeners that participated in this project did such great work, and they didn't just do the work, but they also tracked it, and they reported back the great work that they did so that we're able to tell that story, so that when I'm sitting in a congressperson's office this February, I'll be able to share that number. I'll be able to say that Master Gardeners and SNAP-Ed teamed up this past year, and we grew 67,000 pounds of fruits and vegetables that were then available in food pantries across our state. And it's only because of that great work that Master Gardeners did this summer that I'll be able to do that. So thank you so much to those of you that were part of that project. So sharing our findings, we will share the findings in quite a few different ways. First, we will have the SNAP-Ed annual report, which is actually just being submitted now to USDA. We will also share up with our university leadership. We've done this in a couple of ways already, just so that the university leadership is really aware of what we're up to and able to share it within their own networks. We also have state agency partners, so folks like the Department of Human Services, DHS, as well as the Iowa Department of Public Health, the Iowa Department on Aging. We share with them the projects that we're working on so that they have the opportunity to look for potential partnerships within those projects. We also have submitted a few abstracts to national conferences in the hopes that we'll be able to share the great work happening in Iowa with folks from other states. And as I've mentioned, I'll be making visits to Capitol Hill in February to share this information that way as well. And now just a little bit beyond the numbers. So, the data is really important and obviously super valuable, but there are also stories beyond the numbers. And we were really excited throughout 2016 to see stories rolling in from master gardeners that were part of this project. Because, as I mentioned before, sometimes a story is the best way to really show the impact of a project, to be able to share how it affected one person. That really personalizes all of those numbers. So the stories are a really important piece to have in addition to all of that data. And in 2017, we actually have a really neat project getting going by a PhD student in sustainable agriculture. Her name is Carrie Chenault. And she's going to be doing a photo voice project where she's going to be working with several women in our priority audience and having them document through photographs their own food access and the barriers that they have to healthy food. And that will help us better understand what types of interventions really make a difference. And if we help us really see, do we understand their barriers appropriately? Are there things that we can't really see at this point? I think Carrie's project will really give a rich picture of what food access looks like in communities across Iowa. When you think about your role, if you are going to participate in the Growing Together project in this coming year, We really hope to see growing together as a way that we can strengthen master gardeners and strengthen the kind of impact that you're able to demonstrate. So as you plan your projects, know where you're trying to go and how you'll know when you get there. And document your progress. So if you're growing a donation garden, be very careful to always weigh what's coming out of it and make sure that you're capturing that so that in the end, you're able to tell the story. And as a SNAP-Ed mini grant recipient, I hope you can see how we rely on you to track your impact so that we can show that the money that came from SNAP-Ed to go into your mini grant went toward really effective work, and we've got some nice impacts to share because of it. We only have those if you track them and share them with us. I'm now going to turn it over to Susan DeBleek, who is going to share some additional information with you about master gardeners and tracking, evaluation, and sharing impact.
Thank you, Christine. I just wanted to jump in. This is Susan DeBleek, the Assistant Coordinator for the Iowa Master Gardener Program, to talk a little bit about the metrics that we measure within the Iowa Master Gardener Program. So here in the Iowa Master Gardener Program, we use hours reported online to the volunteer reporting system to track the number of volunteer hours, the total number of continuing education hours, and the number of contacts that these master gardeners are making with their volunteer hours. And each year we track that data and we list our annual reports on our website going back to 2002. So that's one way that we're measuring the impact of master gardeners. You can see here the map of Iowa Master Gardener Volunteer Service in 2015 with the counties in bright yellow that are volunteering over 2,000 hours and then going down to the darkest blue color of less than 50 hours. And so we're always excited to have this information. I know that it's not necessarily fun to log your hours online, but we do use this data, so I encourage you to log your hours today for continuing education. And one of the things that we're finding at the national level is we want to start to communicate what the impact of those volunteer hours is. So Denny Schrock and I have been meeting with national partners from the Extension Master Gardener Program to think about how to measure the impacts of those volunteer hours. We can brag about the fact that master gardeners volunteered over 120,000 hours in 2015. And we also need to share the so what. So you can see pictures here from meetings we've had with partners in both Chicago and in Yellowstone and also in Detroit to try to capture what the impact of those volunteer hours is. And in 2015, the National Extension Master Gardener Program compiled a report and got 38 states to report data on their program for 2015. So you can see here a lot of metrics that we use in terms of the number of volunteers and the volunteer hours and what the value of those volunteer hours is. And you can also see here in terms of the so what that over 846,000 pounds of produce was donated. So this is one way that we can show that the volunteer hours that master gardeners are giving is going towards a larger impact. And the wonderful thing is that we are measuring that now in Iowa. So as you know, we've got 5 different ways that we're evaluating the Growing Together program. We're looking at participation in these continuing education opportunities. We're also looking at the number of volunteer hours going into this program, the amount of partnerships that are developed, how many local coalitions are being developed, and also the pounds of produce. And so it's really wonderful that the pounds of produce is also going to be tracked on a national level so we can start to communicate what the value of Master Gardener volunteers is. So at the national level, we're part of a conversation to create a proposal of how to show the impact of Master Gardeners and answer that so what question. And we're going to continue to track the wonderful data that you're helping us track here in Iowa to show how these volunteer hours are being used and what the community impact of those hours is. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining in this training today. I hope you can now see a little bit clearer picture of why it's so important for us to evaluate our programs, especially those that are funded federally with public funds, and the great things that we're able to do when we have strong evaluation data. The compelling stories we can tell and the really fabulous data we can share. So thank you to all of you Master Gardeners who have contributed to Growing Together's successful first year. And I look forward to hearing about the great work that all of you are going to be doing in the coming years. Thanks a lot and have a great day.
Thank you, Christine. Now I wanted to hand it over to the other Christine, Christine Haddicle from the Oregon Food Bank.
Hello and welcome. My name is Christine Haddicle and I work at Oregon Food Bank as the Statewide Education and Outreach Manager. Today I'll be speaking to you about opportunities for Master Gardeners to partner with food banks, food pantries, and underserved communities. Oregon Food Bank started in the late 80s, distributing USDA commodity supplemental food to food relief agencies. Over the years, we've expanded to collecting food from farmers, manufacturers, wholesalers, retailers, individuals, and government sources. We are now distributing that food through a statewide network of 21 regional food banks that together work with over 900 food pantries across the state of Oregon and Clark County, Washington, to distribute food to those in need. My team, the Statewide Education and Outreach team, coordinates all of the food bank's statewide garden education, nutrition education, and healthcare partnerships. Today I'll be speaking to you about how Master Gardeners and extension programs can partner with food banks and food pantries to provide garden education in underserved communities. I'll be setting the context by talking about the role of poverty and hunger in creating food insecurity, the role that food banks are taking on to address this, and all of the opportunities that exist for Master Gardeners to also play a role in helping their communities. There are currently 46 million Americans living in poverty. That's 1 in 6. There are 1 in 7 households that are food insecure, and those rates are even higher in communities of color. 1 in 4 in African American households, 1 in 5 in Latino households, compared to 1 in 10 in Caucasian households. We at Oregon Food Bank know that hunger is an income issue. But what is this term food security that we throw around so often? We all use it, but it can mean different things to different people. Take a minute to pause this recording and jot down what food security means to you. How would you define it? According to the UN, food security exists when all people, at all times, have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food which meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. It's important to note that food insecure households are not necessarily food insecure all the time. There may be just certain times of the month or certain times of the year or certain times in someone's life when they may be food insecure. Food insecurity reflects a household's need to make a lot of trade-offs in their life between important basic needs such as housing, medical bills, or purchasing nutritionally adequate foods. Do you know what the rate of food insecurity in your community is? You can find out. Feeding America's Map the Meal Gap project highlights hunger at the local community level. By understanding your community's situation, you can better identify strategies for reaching the people who most need food assistance and support services. Let's take a moment to hear Thomas's story. His story is from our Voices project, where we took the time to ask people receiving emergency food assistance to share their story. Folks often shared stories around accessing emergency food, losing their job in a tough economy, having trouble making ends meet, working for wages that didn't support their family, finding it difficult to pay medical bills or afford rent, the difficulties of being homeless, of being hurt by predatory lending or business practices, difficulties finding food or services where they lived, the challenges of living with a disability or waiting for benefits, the challenges of being a farmer in this day and age, the help that they got from cash assistance to get back on their feet, and the benefits they got from SNAP, that's food stamps, child nutrition programs like WIC, school breakfast, lunch, summer foods, or senior farmers market coupons. These are just some of the experiences we've learned from the Voices Project. And now to Thomas's story. My sister couldn't take care of her children, so I stepped up to take care of my nieces and nephews. Kids at their ages, 13, 15, and 11, eat like you wouldn't believe. Oh my God, everything I put in that kitchen is gone. I found out about the pantry from a referral list. I'm not a lazy person. I work hard and I always provided for myself. But when I first became the caretaker of my nieces and nephews, I needed more food in the house. The kids eat everything. I cook a big pot of spaghetti and it might last for 2 days. And food disappears at night. I have one that puts food in her suitcase under the bed. Because of her mother. Her mother had to lock food up because the kids were taking it and giving it to people outside. I had to step up my game when the kids came into the picture. You'd be surprised how much money you can save by just creating your own garden. I grow collard greens, tomatoes, basil, green onions, and parsley. Take a moment to think about Thomas's story. How did you connect with it? Did it bring anything up for you? His story highlights the fact that most adults that are receiving emergency food are actually working or looking for work, and in some cases are retired or unable to work. It highlights the fact that children make up 1 out of every 3 people who eat from an emergency food box. It highlights the fact that unexpected circumstances make people to seek out food assistance, and that without food assistance, children would suffer. It also highlights the fact that hunger affects the kids' communities too, and that they wanted to help and make a difference by sharing what they had. And finally, it highlighted that gardening helped to feed his family, and that gardening can be a tool for resilience. But before we get into gardening and the roles that gardens can play, let's look at the bigger picture of food banking. A food bank is a nonprofit organization that collects and distributes food to hunger relief charities. Food banks act as food storage and distribution depots for smaller frontline agencies, and usually they do not give out food directly to people struggling with hunger. Food usually comes from a variety of sources across the food industry, like grocery stores and wholesalers that have thousands of pounds of food to give away, food that would otherwise be thrown away. Food banks are diverse. Some are very small operations serving people spread out in a rural area. Some are very large facilities that store and distribute millions of pounds of food each year, and there's everything in between. There are a variety of factors that impact how food banks work, from the size of the facility to the number of active volunteers and donors. And yet, many people feel that food banks should be more than just food distribution centers. In his book, Closing the Food Gap, Mark Winnie asks, what could the effects of food banks be if all the energy that was put into soliciting and distributing wasted food was put into ending hunger and poverty? A growing number of food banks across the nation are working on long-term systemic responses to hunger, dedicating significant resources to building community food security while continuing to meet the needs of those experiencing immediate crisis. In addition to providing emergency food, food banks are helping to build community food security, working to end hunger and poverty through advocacy, education, and building grassroots community food networks. They're also working to build public policy strategies that measure success not just by pounds distributed, but in terms of people empowered and long-term change effected. Food banks are starting to show a growing interest in garden education and having food gardens on site as 1 in 3 households now grow a portion of their own food, and there's been a surge in interest amongst gardens in households with an income under $35,000. This comes from a study produced by the National Gardening Association called Garden to Table, a 5-year look at food gardening in America. I highly recommend checking this study out, as it's really fascinating to see the giant surge of interest in this arena. Home and community gardens are now being recognized as an important way to increase fruit and vegetable consumption, to increase physical activity, reduce barriers to fresh food consumption, and to increase social capital. And master gardeners are seen as an asset in this process. As Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack said, master gardener volunteers are a valuable resource for people who want to get some tips on gardening and growing their own food from a real expert. And so there are many opportunities for master gardeners to engage with food banks and food pantries. First off, master gardeners can donate produce and support plant-a-row projects in their communities. They can maintain or help support food bank and food pantry gardens that are on site for clients. They can help with weekly distribution or monthly distribution of gardening resources at these sites, such as seed packets and plant starts, and any other gardening tools that might be available to distribute. And last but not least, they can help teach free or low-cost garden education classes to low-income communities. Many Extension Master Gardeners not only have their own home gardens, but also have demonstration gardens and community gardens that they help to manage. You can increase the health of your community by donating the fresh produce grown in those plots to a local food pantry. Food pantries are in constant need of donations of fresh food to move away from canned goods and processed foods, so any little bit helps. Start by getting in touch with the pantry to find out their hours of operation, how many times they're open per month, when they can accept donations, and the type of donations that they like. You want to find out about the amount, what's too little or too large a donation, and the type of donations. Maybe they have all the winter squash in the world that they need, but they're really looking for fresh tomatoes and onions. This will help you to prioritize the types of donations that you provide to your local pantry. Once you have this information, you can start to organize your donations. Just make sure that the food that you donate is high quality enough that you yourself would want to eat it. Donations should be clean and of a suitable ripeness, with nothing too blemished or overripe. One fun way to donate your produce is to pool your produce from your garden with those from other gardens so that your donation to the local pantry is even larger. There are 2 main organizations that are working across the country to promote the donation of garden produce to food pantries. They're called Ample Harvest and Plant-a-Row for the Hungry. Plant-a-Row is a campaign that was started by the Garden Writers Association, and Ample Harvest is an organization that works to get fresh produce from gardens to local food pantries, whether they were intentionally planted for donation or there was just a bumper crop and someone had too much. Ample Harvest is looking to get all of that surplus to a local pantry to get it to families in need. Both of these organizations have fantastic websites with additional resources that may help you as you organize produce donations in your local communities. But remember, donating produce is great, and it's a great first step, but it's not the only thing you can do as a gardener to make a difference in your community. Garden education can empower your local community members with skills, confidence, and resources to increase their own resilience during economic hardship. I'm now going to talk about Oregon Food Bank's Seed to Supper program, as I think it provides some useful insights into how Extension Master Gardeners can better partner with their local food banks and food pantries and better serve low-income audiences and communities that they may not currently be reaching. Our program was established in 2007. It's a beginning gardening course that gives adult gardeners the tools they need to successfully grow a portion of their food on a limited budget. So it's really looking at low-cost methods for gardening. In 2012, we worked together with Oregon State University Extension to redesign the curriculum, co-brand it, and get it approved for Master Gardeners teaching hours. We now have a huge cohort of Master Gardeners across the state that are teaching this program in 20 counties and working with food bank and food pantry clients that they were never previously working with. The course is offered for free at these community-based sites. It's taught by trained teams of Master Gardener volunteers who get credit for the time that they spend teaching. And the program is reaching a wide variety of participants who have different levels of income and education, different literacy levels, language skills, and challenges with mobility and very limited gardening experience. The curriculum is simple. It goes through the basics of garden planning, soil development and site development. How would you start planting your first garden and caring for it? And then finally, how do you harvest and use your bounty or preserve it for storage? The course also looks at local garden resources, understanding that that is a key for low-income gardeners who have budgetary constraints to find things that are free or low cost. Community members who participate in our program receive a free comprehensive gardening book. They get a certificate of completion that they can use and include with their resume. They get all sorts of seeds and starts to plant in their garden, other gardening tools such as hand trowels and organic fertilizer. They get plenty of new friends and community connections and have demonstrated increased amount of confidence and inspiration for what they can accomplish in their own first garden. There's really a variety of reasons people take this program, not all of which are just because they want to garden. Many people are trying to find ways to stretch their grocery budget or put healthy food on the table for their family, for their children. Others are simply just trying to connect with people and get out of a sense of isolation. And still others are just looking to learn something new. So there's a whole variety of reasons why people take these gardening classes. And it's not just because they want to garden. There's a lot of benefits of our program for Extension Master Gardeners. Currently, Extension Master Gardeners lack racial and ethnic diversity. There's a limited number of them that are specifically committed to vegetable gardening and a limited number that are comfortable working in low-income and diverse communities. So this program provides all of those things. It's providing that diversity of community members that Master Gardeners are interacting with. It's providing a commitment to vegetable gardening and to food growing and providing that focus. The program is deepening Extension's impact by providing free horticulture training to underserved communities and providing Master Gardeners with new ways to get teaching hours for folks that are interested in food gardening and community engagement. It's enhancing their training and capacity around cultural competency, a focus on equity and inclusion of diverse audiences. It's teaching them how to be more effective educators and how to translate their science-based horticulture understanding to a broader public audience. It's also expanding the instructional tools available to Master Gardeners through providing them with a new curriculum that has a lot of hands-on activities that are interactive for adult learners. This helps to draw in the different strengths of Master Gardeners and give each person something to plug into. And as I said, it's helping to diversify the Master Gardener pool by training underrepresented communities in horticulture and creating a pipeline for new recruitment. We do pre- and post-surveys in all of our classes to better understand the audiences we are serving. And this is a really key thing that I think any Master Gardener program should take into account is who are you working with? What do they already know? What are their challenges? What makes it difficult for them to garden? What are they eager to learn about? And what they hope to get out of their participation in your program. So we do a pre and post survey for all of our classes and then use that information to improve and change our program for the following year. The post-survey has given us some really important data on the impact that this program has had on folks. One participant said that the program really helped them to understand how to grow in a new climate. They already knew how to garden, but not in Oregon. And they appreciate also learning about local resources that are available and getting to know their community. A study of the program conducted by Oregon State University Extension found that our participants increased vegetable consumption. Many of them had a garden. 97% of them had a garden after taking the program. 92% of them reported a decrease in their food bill. A huge amount of them said that they were aware of more gardening resources in their community and that they could use SNAP benefits to purchase seeds and starts. And they also still spoke about many of the challenges that they still faced. Money to buy tools, labor and help to actually maintain their garden. Still, many of them needed space just to find a garden. There was less of a challenge of knowing what to do, but it was more the other things that are so critical to making gardening a success. One program participant said, "This class has given me encouragement to be productive and a sense of worth being able to grow food to share with my family and others, something to focus on, and I'm looking forward to getting an education in horticulture to assist in my future employment." Another participant said, "This class has inspired me to do even more gardening. It broadened what I felt I could grow. It greatly improved my diet and the variety available to me. My husband is retired and I'm unemployed, so this was a huge help." And yet another participant said, "This workshop helped me to learn about how to increase the fertility of my soil and how to grow a lot of vegetables in a small space." And another said, "This program has made a big difference in my life. It's given me a sense of community, and it's like I have a family. It's all about community." The importance of building a supportive community where food literacy is encouraged and supported is key to garden education. This diagram shows just some of the integrated partnerships that we have developed through our Seed to Supper program. You can see all the different community organizations and actors that are part of this interconnected web of partnerships of different community groups and organizations. This is what makes a robust community partnership. We have found through our program that we've created social capital by bringing divergent groups and individuals together. We've pooled resources. We've facilitated common goals and identified new common goals. We've extended people's interests and skills into and across communities. Folks that didn't even know they wanted to be involved in this program have found themselves meaningfully engaged. We've empowered individuals to take on new skills and expand what they thought was possible. We've given them resilience and a sense of sustainability in their life, and we've achieved greater food security in our communities. Take a minute to think about how, as Master Gardeners, you might build community partnerships for long-term impact. How would you begin building relationships with a local food bank or local community? How might you go about doing a needs assessment to see what their needs are and what their interests were? It's important to start by asking what your own goals are. What are the goals of your community partners, and where do they overlap? Is your goal to increase low-income client participation in your Master Gardener program? Is their goal to provide food security to their clients? How do your two goals overlap? This is a really important step to take at the beginning when you do your needs assessment. It's important to also take the time to visit with leaders of different diverse community groups to develop relationships with them and identify ways that they want to partner together. As you begin to meet with gatekeepers in underserved communities, make sure to take the time to find out who should be engaged, who's not at the table that should be at the table, and start slow and start small. With Seed to Supper, if when we started in a new community where maybe a food bank wasn't ready, we would work with other agencies but keep the food bank informed. And over time, they started to get interested in what we were doing and started to want to be part of the conversation and taking on a larger role. So just because there may be key leaders or organizations that are not ready to engage at the same level that your Master Gardener program might be ready to engage at, doesn't mean that they can't still be a partner in the conversation, even if it's just providing input and listening and not implementing or coordinating a program. We have found it's really helpful to set up simple activities like a container gardening workshop or a seed and plant giveaway, something simple that engages the community, that is not very intimidating. It's something that is low stakes. It's not a big time commitment, something that's easy for people to get to. So these simple activities can be a great way to begin developing relationships with local community members prior to setting up a workshop series or a more in-depth program. We've found it really helpful to get input on the most suitable times for participation and activities. We're not going to say that Tuesday night from 5 to 7 is the best time just because it's the best time for us. We will ask local communities to give us input on what works for them and when works for them and where. We'll ask for them to develop the terms of their own participation. We work really hard to provide all of our events for free, all of our courses for free, and we found that makes a really big difference in being able to reach low-income audiences that simply cannot afford to pay for the luxury of an educational class. And we've also found that traditional promotional tools such as flyers and press releases don't always work. Word of mouth can often be the best. Social media can be your best friend. You really have to find out what promotional method is key in the communities you're trying to reach and then use that. And it often will not be what you're currently doing. And as you work to expand your audience, take the time to think about, as a group with other Master Gardeners, what attempts have you made this past year to reach out to new audiences? And what have been the barriers to reaching those audiences? Has it been you just simply don't know where to contact them, where they're located? Is it a language barrier, a cultural barrier? Is it you've tried and you haven't gotten an enthusiastic response? Take the time as a group to explore what those barriers are and unpack them and think about ways that you might address them. As a program, we've spent a lot of time looking at the barriers to participation. We've found that transportation has been a big barrier for folks getting to classes. Childcare has been a big barrier. Not having a meal provided during class. There have been a number of reasons why people are not able to participate, and it may not always be what you think. So really taking the time to ask and unpack and discover could help to make a big difference in increasing your participation amongst underserved audiences. And then by working with organizations and agencies that have access to those audiences, you will be, you'll have an automatic in as well. We have found it really helpful to have regular sessions, something that is consistent so that people know there's always something for them to drop in on or attend when they're available. We found it very important to have relevant crop information, something that is appropriate for someone's culture and for their local growing climate. We found having a very welcoming environment, a welcoming learning environment is key, not something that's intimidating or an environment where folks feel like they have to know a lot already before they come to the class. One of the biggest challenges for our Master Gardener educators is just keeping the lesson simple, trying to boil down all of these complicated horticultural concepts and information into something really simple that anyone could listen to and take away and remember. Another constant challenge for us is moving away from PowerPoint and lecture style education to hands-on education. We know that that's the way that people learn best, and we are making a really big concerted effort to move primarily to hands-on methods of instruction because of the feedback we've gotten from so many different food bank clients. We've also learned that we need to allow clients the time to share their own experience. They have and are living through very stressful times, and oftentimes these gardening classes are the only spaces where they can come together to share their experiences. So really making time for that community sharing is key. And then finally, creating opportunities for your participants to take things home. You know, maybe you do an activity in class where you put soil in a jar to do the jar test with water and look at the different layers of soil. That's an activity that someone can replicate at home with very little materials needed. So thinking through what you're teaching and demonstrating and encouraging people to do at home would be a key way to be inclusive with low-income audiences. Through our experience offering Seed to Supper over the last 10 years and expanding to many new communities across the state, we have found that engaging new, particularly low-income audiences does require a lot of time. It does require a lot of intention and effort to build new relationships, to build up trust between different community partners. But when you have that, it can really lead to something incredible. We found that it does require flexibility and accommodation around providing language interpretation or translation, transportation to classes, childcare, food, whatever you can do to make an environment more enticing, more appealing, and more adaptable to people's circumstances, the better chance of success you'll have. We found that programs like this speak for themselves. We have done zero recruitment and marketing. It's been completely word of mouth. That's how we started this program. That's how it's expanded across the entire state. That's how food banks and food pantries are contacting us every week, is because they hear it from others and they hear how successful it has been and they want to be a part of it. And that's the same with the Master Gardeners. We're constantly getting Master Gardeners saying, we want to make a difference in our communities. How can we engage? So if your program becomes successful, it will speak for itself and it will lead to others. We found that knowledge is not really the end goal with this program. Teaching gardening knowledge is part of it, but appropriate teaching methods and materials is probably more important than simply what is being taught, and really taking the time to examine how you teach, not just what you teach, but really the delivery side is going to be critical to beginning gardeners, particularly low-income beginning gardeners, succeeding. And you will see people taking what they've learned and applying it in home gardens and community gardens and having other projects spin off of that. That will be an outcome of this if you take the time to really make it suitable and adaptable to the local communities you're working with. In Seed to Supper, we really teach all of our Master Gardeners to become mindful instructors, mindful that participants in gardening classes come from a wide variety of backgrounds and cultures and communities with a diverse set of worldviews and philosophies, experiences, and interests. For example, would you call this an eggplant, an aubergine, or brinjal? Would you call it a zucchini, courgette, or marrow? Economic, geographic, and cultural backgrounds shape the way we look at food. and our reference points in the world. All of us have grown up with different cultural backgrounds and approaches to growing food and preparing food. And when we work as educators, garden educators, we must remember this, that we each have our own perspective, and we're bringing that as educators to our classes. Imagine this was a group of students that showed up to a garden workshop that you're teaching. They walk in the door, you know nothing about them. Is their primary language English? Are they employed? What kind of job do they have? Do they live alone? Are they a parent? Were they born in the U.S.? Are they differently abled? What's their cultural background? Have they ever gardened before? Does their family have a history of farming or agriculture? How might you adapt your teaching, garden education, to allow for and benefit from all of these varied backgrounds? How might each person's unique experience affect their own learning? And what can you do as a Master Gardener educator to create a culturally responsive learning environment? I can't emphasize enough how important it is to take the time to get to know your audience. Not only the geography of where they're based and their demographics, but what they know, what they want to learn, and what challenges they face. Maybe they're most interested in learning about pest and disease control, or how to grow particular vegetables from their culture, or certain tips on soil health. Maybe their challenges are that they don't have the money to buy tools, or don't know where to get cheap seeds and starts, or don't have the time because they're working 2 jobs and don't have the time to weed their garden. Whatever challenges they have, take the time to get to know them so that you can be a more effective educator in addressing the barriers to gardening. When teaching gardening at a food bank or food pantry, it's important to be aware of how you're relating to the food bank clients, respecting the fact that they will be facing a variety of challenges that you may not be facing, and that those challenges are going to determine the way and the approach to gardening that they bring to the class. Be aware that they may be trying to just feed their families enough food and may not be focused on getting nutritious food. That may affect what they decide to plant in their garden. Families may also be thinking about what is realistic and achievable for them, given all the different factors and stressors in their life. It's important to always be aware of your own frame of reference and not make assumptions based on that reference, but be aware of all the different constraints that others in the class are facing. When teaching about gardening, it's important to show mindfulness. Be open and curious about people's food experiences. Tell your own stories and ask others to share theirs. Find out what foods are cultural or might be used as medicine or to promote health. Ask participants to share their favorite foods and meals as well. Although you might think everyone comes to a garden class with good intentions, sometimes people make assumptions or ask unconscious questions or comments that unintentionally hurt others, or might make a garden workshop or class environment to be not inclusive. I'm going to be sharing a couple of comments that were said in Seed to Supper classes. Think about what the intention behind the statement might have been, why the statement might have been harmful to a participant in the class, and how you, as an educator, might have addressed it. No garden is complete without, and then the educator listed a bunch of expensive tools. Think about what the intention might have been behind the statement. The educator was trying to share all the different tools that could be very helpful for a gardener. But why that statement might be harmful is because it's telling participants they need to go to Home Depot and spend $200 on all X, Y, and Z fancy tools in order to have a garden. That might make someone who's living on a low income feel like they can't garden because they don't have the money to buy those tools. If you were to hear a statement like this, as an educator, you could jump in and say, well, there's no better tools than your own 2 hands, or some other comment that helps participants to understand that really gardening doesn't have to be expensive and that they can use whatever they have and whatever resources are available to them. Another comment that was said in class was, "I can't believe you tried to grow okra here." Now, what might the intention have been? Well, the instructor was trying to let students know that okra really isn't designed to grow in this climate. But that statement might be harmful for a student who was just experimenting, giving it a shot. Who knows, maybe if they created a little microclimate in their low tunnel, they could grow it successfully with enough heat. So, as an instructor, you might jump in and say, well, actually, why not? Let's try giving it a try. Maybe okra could grow here. And finally, another example of a statement said in class by an educator was, "Miracle-Gro is a bad choice." Now, it's obvious that this instructor has an opinion about Miracle-Gro and decided to share that in class. But that could have been harmful to a participant in the class who might have had Miracle-Gro at home or recently bought it at the store. It's important as educators that we are mindful that everyone is going to have a different lived experience, a different perspective, a different opinion. And as garden educators, it's our role to be facilitators of learning and not take a position on these things. We really feel that it's not enough to just provide gardening information, but to also facilitate connections to garden resources in our communities. All of our educators take the time in each of their workshops and classes to go through a brainstorm with everyone in the room to find out where there's free or inexpensive gardening classes or workshops available, where to get compost or mulch, where to access seeds and starts at a low cost or for free, where to get a garden if someone doesn't have access to a land, where to get gardening tools or seek advice or take other gardening classes. Taking the time to explore each of these and have everyone in the room share tips of places they know that they can get free or very low cost gardening resources is a good use of your time, because it helps to create more community connections and awareness of all the resources that exist in your community. As garden educators, we also take the time to think about different scenarios that we might encounter in working with food bank clients. Here are a couple of common gardening scenarios that we encounter among our students. Take the time to read through these scenarios and think through how you might approach it in your own community. One of your gardening students has just signed on to a new community garden plot. She's very excited to get started, but the community garden doesn't supply tools, and her budget won't allow her to buy new ones. What ideas do you share with her? One of your students has access to a little garden bed at his apartment building, but he's worried about the expense of seeds and plant starts. He asks if you know of any programs that make seeds and starts available to folks living on low incomes. What do you say? Another student tells you that she lives in a multifamily housing unit with no space to garden. She's taking this class because she wants to learn and hopes to find a gardening space someday soon, but her budget is very limited. She asks you if you have any ideas about how to find a garden space. What do you say? One of your students has become very interested in the idea of vertical gardening. He's a senior, living on a fixed income, and can't afford to purchase the pre-made trellises and tomato cages he sees at the grocery store. What ideas would you share with him? As a group, with your fellow master gardeners, you can think of other common gardening barriers or scenarios that you've encountered in teaching classes and workshops. Think them through ahead of time and know what your response would be so that when someone asks you one of these questions, you're not caught off guard. In this final section of my presentation, I'm going to talk about the different ways that people learn and how, as garden educators, we need to be mindful and aware and adaptable to teaching different, diverse groups of learners. Start by thinking about how you like to learn. Take a minute to jot down some ideas about the best ways that you like to learn. Also write down the ways you don't learn and what stops you from learning. As adults, many of us learn in ways that are different from our childhood learning experiences. In general, adult learners approach learning opportunities with specific goals that are shaped by their lived experience. They're motivated to find concrete solutions to real problems. For example, motivated to grow food so that they can reduce their grocery budget, reduce the cost required to feed their family, or to improve their health and nutrition. They like to understand why they are learning something and why they're doing something. It's not enough to just say, add compost to the garden. They want to know why. And finally, they're task-oriented and like education with a practical result. So that means not just learning random bits of information for the sake of it, but really something that's applicable in their lives. This slide is a metaphor for traditional types of instruction or learning. What are we seeing in this slide? Well, a funnel which helps us get homemade salsa into a canning jar, but what might that be a metaphor for? In some educational settings, instructors look at teaching as a one-way process, i.e., imparting knowledge from an expert to the uninformed, as if the instructor is funneling information into the minds of the learner. Have you ever seen an educational environment like that? Have you ever experienced that as a learner? Might you have imparted this type of instruction as an educator? Take the time to think about it. In this next slide, what do you see? This is a different type of learning environment. We can't tell from the picture who the instructor is. Everyone is fully engaged. There's a lot of dynamic things happening, a lot of tactile learning and engagement. Everyone is involved in the process. There's not one way, there's no one master imparting information to another person. Ultimately, adult learners are experts in their own lives. How can we create learning spaces with this in mind? We know that a learner-centered environment means people remember best when they are engaged in dialogue and have an opportunity to do hands-on practice. Take a minute to think about the last workshop or session you taught. How much of it was hands-on? How much of it included engaged dialogue? Facilitated dialogue is a method of group teaching that involves active participation of both the learner and the educator. With facilitated dialogue, the garden educator's role is to facilitate meaningful conversation, not to do all the talking. Instructors should be helping to guide the conversation so that learners are listening, sharing, and learning from one another. Facilitating dialogue helps with open-ended questions. Take a minute to jot down some examples of open-ended questions. Can Karens be transplanted an open-ended question? No, because open-ended questions don't have right or wrong answers, and they don't seek yes or no answers. Rather, they help everyone to reflect and make information personally relevant to them. When using a facilitated dialogue in a gardening workshop, you may anticipate that some students will feel uncomfortable, that the conversation might get off track, or you may run out of time in class, and some students might present misinformation. It's hard to create an environment where everyone feels safe to share what they're thinking. Some students might overtake conversation while others will stay in the background. This teaching style disrupts the power dynamic that exists between student and teacher and may not appeal to all types of cultures. It's important to think about how you'll get back on track if this happens. Start by identifying your class objectives. You can use a route cellar or bike rack or parking lot to record off-topic ideas and remember when to visit them appropriately. You can also use it to summarize what you've covered. You can have a timekeeper be there to help you get back on track if the conversation goes in a different direction. There will be times when using facilitated dialogue that someone will say something that is simply not correct. Maybe they're talking about a specific type of crop or variety or gardening technique, and everyone knows that it's just factually not correct. You can still thank that participant for their contribution and correct the information by highlighting the most up-to-date research that you know of. You can still thank them for their contribution and emphasize how important it is to share different input and experiences. I'm going to go through some scenarios for you to think about how you might use facilitated dialogue. In this first scenario, you're teaching a gardening workshop and you want to get to know the participants a little bit better, understand their experience and what they hope to learn. How do you do this? What are some questions you might ask that are open-ended and that prompt participants to share? Scenario 2. You're talking about planting veggies from seed. You're not sure if the participants are already familiar with starting veggies from seed or how much they're interested in learning about the topic. What are some open-ended questions you might ask to get this information? What are questions that might draw out participation from everyone in the room, including those that like to stay quiet and not speak in public? Scenario 3. You're doing such a great job at facilitating dialogue that the conversation has gotten way off track. It's time to move on to the next topic. How might you steer the conversation back to where it needs to be while acknowledging and keeping track of what everyone in the room is talking about? Scenario 4. One of the participants in your class mentions that she's had a lot of luck growing tomatoes with a chemical fertilizer. And another participant responds by saying, all non-organic fertilizers are evil and cause cancer. How might you use facilitated dialogue to open up the conversation and address this potentially offensive comment? How might you address potential misinformation, even if you're not an expert? Scenario 5. You're talking about affordable ways to find plant starts, and some participants mention that they only shop for starts at the end of the season when they're on sale. You realize that this makes it hard to take advantage of the full growing season and is not ideal, but you also know that this may be what works best for people given their unique economic situations. What are some questions you could ask that would prompt participants to explore this issue while still being respectful of their experience? Scenario 6. You're teaching a workshop focused on garden maintenance. Some participants comment that it seems very challenging to find the time to keep up weeding with their busy schedules. What are some questions you could ask the whole group to help these participants find solutions that work for them? It helps to also take the time to observe your own teaching style. Ask a friend to observe you the next time you teach. Did you use facilitated dialogue or open-ended questions during your class or workshop? Did you give expert advice where appropriate instead of using facilitated dialogue? Did you act with mindfulness and sensitivity to the needs and interests of your audience? Did you help participants to connect with local gardening resources? Did you reinforce previous learning that they may have learned from previous workshops or things they already knew? These are just some of the questions you can consider as you observe your own teaching style or that of a friend or colleague. To recap, to create a learner-centered class, you must recognize the unique life experiences each adult learner is bringing to the interaction. You should make the gardening information you're sharing relevant to their life and various experiences. And you should present that gardening information in a way that is accommodating to different types of learners. Not all lecture, maybe not all hands-on, maybe somewhere in between, maybe a mix. While still remembering, there are 4 parts of learning a new skill. This comes from Jane Vella. These 4 parts are anchoring, adding, applying, and away. Anchoring, connecting learners with what they already know. Adding, inviting learners to examine new concepts. Applying, getting learners to do something differently with that new concept. Away, integrating the concept into the learner's life. Think about how you might apply anchoring, adding, applying, away the next time you teach a workshop on weed or pest management, or the next time you teach a workshop on composting. What do they already know on composting? How can you invite them to learn new concepts around composting? How can they then do something with this new concept? And how can they integrate it back into their life? To recap some of the lessons learned from our program, we have found it very important for Master Gardeners to attend every session in a workshop or course series we offer so that they can start to develop relationships with the participants. It's a very different experience when it's just a series of talking heads with a new instructor each week. By having Master Gardeners return each week, they're able to reinforce what participants learned in the previous sessions and build upon what they already know. We've also found it's very important to provide more individualized one-on-one technical assistance. Having a very high ratio of Master Gardeners available at a workshop or course can help to provide that one-on-one attention that many food bank clients need as they start to learn how to garden. It's also helpful to have additional Master Gardeners available on site as participants want extra help. We have found it critical to have a very flexible curriculum approach where we don't have a one-size-fits-all course. We have modules that are adaptable. They can be different lengths, several weeks, or one-time offerings. And by having this flexible modular approach to our curriculum, we found that we were able to meet the needs of a wide variety of food banks and food pantries, as well as other social service agencies we work with. We have found that evaluation has been key to the development of our program. Learning what works and what doesn't work for participants, as well as for our Master Gardener educators, has really helped us to move in a direction of meeting the needs of our clients and keeping them at the center of what we do and ensuring that our curriculum is responsive to the diverse needs of all of our underserved communities. And finally, just to reiterate, we have learned that you are only as strong as your partnerships, and that we can go to a new county and start a garden program, but if the food bank and food pantries are not on board and local religious and social service organizations are not on board, we're not going to be as strong as if we were all in partnership together. And that has been the strength of this program and the strength of being able to provide such a robust free garden education program across the state has just been the network of all the different organizations working together. So that, I'm going to leave you with that. But here is my contact information. If you do have any questions about anything that I've said in this presentation, feel free to get in touch. Thanks very much. Bye. Thanks very much.